The officiant's words hung in the air, a familiar formality at every wedding. If anyone present knows any reason why this couple should not be lawfully wedded, speak now or forever hold your peace. It's a line you hear in movies, a tradition nobody ever acts on in real life. Or so I thought. A chair scraped against the polished hardwood in the back row. My head snapped around. There he stood, Logan, wearing the charcoal suit I'd paid for 3 years ago. He squared his shoulders, his voice cutting through the hushed silence of 200 guests. I object. She is legally bound to my business debts, and she cannot marry him. You could hear the ice melting in water glasses. 200 guests held their breath. My mother stiffened in the front row, her hand flying to her chest. But I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just turned back to Julian, my groom. Julian is a forensic accountant. He thrives in details, in the cold, hard facts. He offered me a quiet, almost imperceptible smile, buttoned his tuxedo jacket, and reached into his inner pocket. He pulled out a thick, sealed manila envelope. The only sound was the soft thud of his leather shoes striking the floorboards as he walked down the aisle. He stopped 2 feet in front of Logan, holding out the envelope. "I've been waiting 6 months to serve you this," Julian said, his voice low, steady, and loud enough for the back 3 rows to hear. Logan snatched the envelope, ripped the top open, and pulled out a stack of papers. I watched his eyes scan the first few lines. The smug confidence slid off his face, replaced by a pallor the color of wet ash. His thumb trembled so violently it caught the edge of the paper and drew blood. To understand what Julian handed him, we need to rewind 3 years, back to the day this war started in Bismarck, North Dakota. The first warning sign didn't come with a scream or a slammed door. It arrived with a simple beep from a credit card machine. It was a Tuesday morning. I own a premium winter apparel boutique, a business I built from nothing, following a rule my late grandfather drilled into my head since I was a child. Always keep your own wood chopped. I took pride in my independence, working hard, saving every penny. Logan, on the other hand, was an aspiring real estate developer. He talked hard. He used words like leverage and equity, carrying around a heavy, custom blue ink pen like it was a prop in a movie. I stood at the counter of my local coffee shop, ordering a $4 dark roast. I slid my business debit card to the barista. She swiped it. The machine beeped. Declined. I smiled, embarrassed, assuming it was a bank error. I pulled out my personal card to pay for the drink, then took my coffee to a corner table and opened the banking app on my phone. The screen loaded. I stared at the numbers. My operating account balance was wrong. $35,000 was gone. My chest tightened. The screen blurred. I scrolled down to the transaction history and saw a transfer I never authorized. And I knew exactly who had access to my routing numbers. My dark roast coffee sat untouched, growing cold against my palms. Outside the frosted window, Bismarck was enduring another bitter freeze. The wind howled against the glass, but the chill creeping up my spine had nothing to do with the weather. I closed my eyes, took a shallow breath, and hit the refresh icon. The screen blinked, the little loading circle spun for a second, and the same terrifying negative number reappeared. My boutique's operating account was gutted. I traced the transaction line with my thumb. It was an outbound wire transfer to an unknown limited liability company, but I recognized the authorization signature code. Logan had watched me type my PIN number into my laptop months ago. My boutique wasn't just a hobby. It was the anchor of my entire existence. North Dakota winters are unforgiving, and I sold high-end gear meant to withstand sub-zero temperatures. I built the inventory season by season, working 12-hour days, plowing every slim profit margin back into the floorboards. I knew the scent of every leather glove and the exact thread count of every wool parka in my stockroom. I inherited that relentless drive from my late grandfather. He raised me after my parents passed away. He was a man with calloused hands, quiet pride, and strict principles. He taught me early on that financial dependence was a dangerous trap. "Always keep your own wood chopped," he used to say, while stacking heavy oak logs behind our cabin. "If you rely on someone else for warmth, you will freeze the second they decide to walk away." I lived my entire adult life by that rule. I protected my assets. I paid in cash. I never asked for a handout until I met Logan. He was an aspiring commercial real estate developer. He sold potential. He wore tailored suits, drove a leased luxury sedan, and constantly talked about leveraging equity. Whenever he pitched a new property flip to investors, he would pull out a custom, heavy-barrel blue ink pen. He ordered it from a specialty shop in London. He treated that pen like a magic wand, spinning it fluidly between his knuckles while tossing around terms like yield spreads and return on investment. I loved his ambition. I mistook his slick hunger for a genuine work ethic. I left the coffee shop and drove straight to our shared apartment. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Logan was sitting at the kitchen island, sipping a protein shake and scrolling through his tablet. His custom blue pen rested next to his coffee mug. I dropped my phone onto the marble counter. The banking screen was still illuminated. "Where is my $35,000? I asked, my voice a low, steady hum. Logan didn't jump. He didn't look guilty or ashamed. He casually locked his tablet screen, picked up his blue pen, and clicked the top. He offered a patient, condescending smile. "It's just a bridge loan. Monday I secured a lucrative commercial property on the south side of town. The earnest money was due at midnight, and my own capital is tied up in escrow right now. I'm going to double that money in 30 days. "You stole from my operating account," I said, leaning closer to him. "I have seasonal inventory invoices due next week. If those vendors don't get paid, my supply chain freezes. My shelves will be empty by Christmas." Logan sighed. He stood up, walked around the island, and placed his hands on my shoulders. His grip was firm, meant to ground me, but it felt like a set of handcuffs. "I didn't steal anything," he murmured, his tone dripping with mock sympathy. "We are getting married in 6 months. What is mine is yours, and what is yours is ours. We are a team. I need a supportive partner right now, not a paranoid girlfriend tracking pennies." I stepped back, forcing his hands off my shoulders. "They are not pennies, Logan. That money keeps the lights on. You had no right to touch it without asking me first." "If I asked, you would have said no," he replied smoothly. "You always play it too safe, Monday. You hoard cash like a frightened squirrel. To build an empire, you have to take calculated risks. I am building our future. Do you want to sell parkas for the rest of your life, or do you want to retire at 40 and travel the world?" He spun the blue pen through his fingers. His words, laced with a promise of a grand future, were a familiar tune. He always painted visions of luxury, of escaping the mundane, of a life where I wouldn't have to chop my own wood anymore. He made me feel small for my carefulness, my independence. He made me question my grandfather's wisdom. I stood there, staring at him, the man I was supposed to marry, the man who had just stolen from me, then gaslighted me into believing it was for our shared future. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't ambition. This was entitlement. This was a man who saw my hard work as his personal ATM. That night, I didn't sleep. I replayed every conversation, every grand promise, every subtle manipulation. The next morning, I called my lawyer. I told him everything. He advised me to cut ties immediately, to protect my business and myself. But Logan had already intertwined our finances more than I realized. He had convinced me to co-sign on a business loan for a property he was developing, assuring me it was a formality, a sign of our commitment. He had even, under the guise of estate planning, gotten me to sign documents related to his burgeoning, opaque LLCs. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah, started untangling the mess. It was far worse than I imagined. Logan had used my credit, my business accounts, and even my personal information to secure loans and funnel money into his shell corporations. He was building his empire, all right, but he was doing it on my foundation, with my resources. The next few months were a blur of legal meetings, forensic audits, and a sickening realization of the depth of Logan's betrayal. He denied everything, of course, spinning elaborate lies about how I was misunderstanding the complexities of real estate finance. He even tried to turn my family against me, painting me as a cold, unsupportive partner who was sabotaging his success. But I had Julian. I met him through Sarah, who recommended him as the best forensic accountant in the state. Julian was quiet, meticulous, and possessed a razor-sharp intellect. He dove into Logan's financial labyrinth, tracing every transaction, every shell company, every fraudulent signature. He found a pattern, a sophisticated scheme of embezzlement and corporate fraud that went far beyond the initial $35,000. He discovered that Logan had been systematically siphoning funds from my business, using my identity to secure loans, and even involving his own sister, Harper, as a registered agent for one of his holding companies, without her full knowledge of the implications. Julian and I worked tirelessly, building a case brick by brick. We decided to keep our investigation completely secret from Logan. We wanted to catch him completely off guard, to ensure his downfall was swift and undeniable. We waited. We gathered evidence. We prepared for the perfect moment to strike. That moment arrived on my wedding day. Logan, convinced he had me legally ensnared, believed he could walk into my wedding and stop it. He thought he had the upper hand, that his fabricated legal claims would halt the ceremony and humiliate me. He didn't know about Julian. He didn't know about the 6 months of meticulous work, the federal charges, the civil lawsuits, and the carefully crafted plan to dismantle his entire fraudulent empire. As Logan stood there, his face turning the color of wet ash, Julian calmly explained what was in the envelope. "These are federal indictments, Logan," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room, "for corporate fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement. The FBI has been building this case for months. The other documents are civil lawsuits from every one of your victims, including Mon, demanding restitution for every penny you stole. And finally, a notice of foreclosure on every property you acquired with stolen funds, including the one you secured with Mon's $35,000. Logan crumpled. His custom blue pen, the one he treated like a magic wand, slipped from his trembling fingers and clattered to the floor. He looked around, his eyes wide with panic, searching for his mother, for anyone who would come to his rescue. But there was only silence, and the cold, unblinking stares of 200 people who had just witnessed his public unraveling. The police, who Julian had discreetly arranged to be present, stepped forward. Logan was arrested right there, in the middle of my wedding ceremony. The officiant, a kind man who had witnessed countless weddings, simply cleared his throat and asked, "Does anyone else object?" The silence was deafening. Julian and I exchanged a look. It was over. The war was won. We finished our vows, our voices steady and clear. The rest of the day was a blur of joy and relief. My grandfather's words echoed in my mind. "Always keep your own wood chopped." I had learned that lesson the hard way, but I had also learned the strength of my own resolve, and the value of a partner who truly understood the meaning of support. Logan's sister, Harper, also faced consequences. Julian had sent her a warning letter, outlining her legal exposure as the registered agent of Logan's shell company. She had been unknowingly complicit, a pawn in her brother's scheme. The letter, delivered by certified mail, detailed the corporate structure, the stolen funds channeled through the entity bearing her social security number, and cited specific state statutes regarding accessory liability and corporate fraud. It concluded with a polite notification that a civil lawsuit naming her as a primary co-defendant was in the drafting phase. 2 days later, Harper signed for the envelope. Julian monitored the delivery confirmation online. I imagined her tearing it open, scanning the dense legal terminology, the highlighted financial figures, and the explicit mention of her own social security number. I pictured the color draining from her face as the arrogant safety of her brother's shadow dissolved into genuine terror. Logan built his entire facade on the loyalty of his enablers. But loyalty born from convenience shatters under the weight of personal consequence. The spark was lit. A civil war was about to detonate inside Logan's own house. The certified letter detonated with absolute precision. Julian called me while I was reviewing shipping manifests. "She called the office 3 times in the last 20 minutes, he said, his voice crisp. "She's leaving frantic voicemails. The panic is palpable." "Let her sweat," I replied, tapping my pen against the desk. "Don't return the calls until tomorrow morning." The next day, Julian agreed to a meeting. We chose a quiet, dimly lit diner on the outskirts of Bismarck, far from the polished downtown cafes where Logan preferred to conduct his business. The vinyl booths were cracked, the coffee tasted like burnt copper, and the fluorescent lights hummed a low, erratic tune. It was the perfect environment for a surrender. Julian and I arrived early, sitting in a corner booth facing the door. 10 minutes past the agreed hour, the diner door chimed. Harper walked in. She looked nothing like the arrogant, demanding woman who had stood in my kitchen chewing a green apple and telling me to liquidate my inheritance. Her designer winter coat looked bulky and awkward on her shrinking frame. Her eyes were red-rimmed, shadowed by dark, heavy circles. She clutched a cheap canvas tote bag tightly against her chest, her knuckles white. She spotted us and slid into the vinyl booth opposite me. She didn't order coffee. She didn't offer a polite greeting. She placed her hands flat on the scratched table, her fingers trembling violently. "Is the letter real?" Harper asked, her voice cracking on the final syllable. "Are you actually going to name me as a primary co-defendant in a federal lawsuit?" Julian folded his hands atop the table. "The letter outlines your legal exposure based on established corporate documentation," he explained, his tone strictly professional. "Your social security number is the anchoring credential for the holding company currently receiving stolen funds. Under the law, you are the registered agent. The liability rests on your shoulders." "I didn't know," Harper pleaded, leaning forward, her eyes darting between Julian and me. "I swear to you. Monday Logan told me he needed to use my name for a temporary tax shelter because his credit was tied up in a commercial escrow account. He promised me it was a standard procedure. He said it would help my own tax returns. I never touched the money. I never authorized any wire transfers. You have to believe me." I looked at her, searching for the smug entitlement that had defined our last interaction. I found only raw, unadulterated fear. The generational loyalty holding their family together dissolved the second the threat of prison entered the room. Harper was realizing that the brothers she worshipped viewed her as disposable collateral. "Ignorance is not a recognized legal defense for corporate fraud, Harper," I stated, keeping my voice cold and measured. "You allowed him to weaponize your identity against me. You stood in my apartment and demanded I empty my savings to save him, all while your name shielded his theft." A tear spilled over her lower lash line, cutting a track through her pale skin. In the end, Harper cooperated fully, providing critical evidence against Logan, and ultimately receiving a plea deal that spared her prison time but left her financially devastated. Logan, on the other hand, faced the full weight of the federal justice system. He was convicted and sentenced to a significant prison term, his empire crumbling into dust. This whole ordeal taught me profound lessons about trust, boundaries, and the true meaning of family. My grandfather's wisdom about chopping your own wood wasn't just about financial independence. It was about self-reliance, about knowing your own worth, and about refusing to let anyone else dictate your warmth. Logan's mother, Brenda, was a stark contrast to my grandfather. She practiced the dark, toxic art of enabling. She confused blind loyalty with maternal love. Whenever her son faltered, she rushed in to smooth the pavement, point the finger at someone else, and demand the rest of the world bend to accommodate his flaws. She taught Logan that his charm could bypass the rules of fairness, and that honesty was merely an obstacle to be manipulated. When parents refuse to hold their children accountable, they do not create confident leaders. They create fragile, hollow individuals who believe they are entitled to the harvest of someone else's labor. In her desperate attempt to protect her son from failure, she ultimately guaranteed his destruction. The children we raise today will eventually step out into the world, seeking partnerships, running businesses, and building families of their own. The moral framework we install in their minds will dictate whether they become architects of their own success or parasites feeding off the strength of others. If this reflection resonates with the dynamics you have witnessed or experienced in your own life, if you value stories that peel back the layers of human psychology and justice, I encourage you to follow the channel Revenge Order. We explore the profound intersections of consequence, boundary setting, and the relentless pursuit of truth in a world that often rewards deception. Subscribe to join a community dedicated to unpacking the complex architecture of human behavior. In the end, the stories we tell about our families are rarely just about the events that transpired. They are mirrors reflecting our deepest values, our hidden fears, and the quiet choices we make every single day. We spend years watering the soil of our children's minds, pruning their habits, and hoping the roots take hold. But the true test of a parent's legacy does not happen under the safety of our own roofs. It happens years later in boardrooms, in quiet apartments, and sometimes at the altar of a winter wedding. When the inevitable storms of life finally arrive, and the wind begins to howl against the glass, we can only hope we taught them well enough. We must wonder as we look at our own reflections in the frosted window panes if we truly prepared them to face the cold or if we merely delayed the freeze. The answer, often hidden until it is far too late to change, is the only inheritance that truly matters.